common thread runs through the many tributes that were paid to Laurence Olivier after his death this summer. It is that this actor, whose majestic performances enthralled so many audiences, possessed more than his share of courage and of daring. And it's those qualities of courage and daring which he showed both in his working life and in the way that he faced up to illness in his later years that's being celebrated here at Westminster Abbey today. He was, by common consent, the greatest English actor of his generation. And many of his colleagues have come here today to pay him that tribute. Sir Alec Guinness will be giving the address. Sir John Gielgud, Dame Peggy Ashcroft, Sir John Mills, Albert Finney will all be giving readings. And filling the stalls of the Abbey, many, many more from the worlds of the stage and film and television, which he bestrode. The names from 3 generations of stage and film and television have come here to pay tribute to Lord Olivier today, and you'll recognize many famous faces among the congregation. Peter Barkworth there in the center, and people who've, Geraldine McEwen, Dave Clark of the Dave Clark Five at the back there, and Wendy Hiller, many who've played with Olivier, many who are great admirers of his, people as well from the production of television and film and theatre, going back across the whole long period of his reign. During his long life, Laurence Olivier created a collection of characters that was almost Dickensian in its range, and to most of them he brought personal magnetism and a palpable sense of danger, both in conception and in the physical risks he so often took. As a young actor, married to Jill Esmond, he knew success early, both on stage and film. But his talent to astound didn't surface until 1935, when, aged 28, he alternated the roles of Romeo and Mercutio with John Gielgud. Unlike the poetic Gielgud, Olivier shattered the traditional Shakespearean mold with a virile performance which put meaning before music in the verse. Many critics were outraged. But time was to prove that with that one performance, he'd changed the direction of classical acting in our time. Enthusiasm for his vivid realism was gaining ground when he was lured to Hollywood. He became one of its major romantic stars.
Kathy, you're not thinking of that other world now.
Smell the heather. Eat, fill my arms with heather. All they can hold. Come on.
Kathy! You're still my queen.
In 1940, he married Vivian Leigh, and for almost 20 years, they were the theatre's most stylish couple. Soon after the marriage, the intensely patriotic Olivier returned to wartime Britain to serve in the Fleet Air Arm. Not for long, though, because he was asked by the Information Ministry to make a film of Shakespeare's Henry V. The result, released in 1944, was a triumph for Olivier, both as star and director. On screen, Olivier followed Henry V with Hamlet, which won Academy Awards for Best Film and Best Actor. And while making it, he was invested at 39 as the youngest knight in theatre history. On stage, meanwhile, his preeminence was reconfirmed by his Richard III, also later put on film.
Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this sun of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean, buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures.
In 1957, Olivier again astounded his audience by lending his name and his talent to a controversial anti-establishment movement in the theatre. The role, a seedy song and dance man. The play, John Osborne's The Entertainer. 1960, Olivier remarried Joan Plowright, one of the finest actresses of her generation, who was to bring him new happiness as a family man. Professionally, he continued to serve the theatre at the expense of his pocket, as the first director of the Chichester Festival Theatre, and then in 1962 as first director of the National Theatre. During almost 10 years in that post, he masterminded its golden age. Created a life peer in 1970, he always remained plain Larry to his colleagues. At the National, he also gave some of his greatest performances, including an unforgettable Othello. But then, for the first time, he was laid low by what became a series of illnesses. Outfacing death, he nevertheless was forced to limit himself to films and television, which was to be the medium for his last Shakespearean role as King Lear. Shortly before his death, he wrote that he wondered if he himself hadn't become a little like Lear, wearing an invisible theatrical crown to which he was very attached and which he would not give up. And he warned any would-be usurper who wanted the crown that first he'd have to dust clean the blackboard of the chalk of memory. And he defiantly promised him that at the entrance of the Chamber of Gold would stand an old man, legs apart, back straight and erect, eyes piercing, barring the way. Many of Olivier's admirers have come to the Abbey this morning, including one of his oldest friends, Sir John Mills.
Well, I think one thing I remember about Larry is that he owned the stage when he walked on it. I mean, it belonged to him, and he totally owned it. He was wonderful to watch in the theatre. He was complete magic. But the thing I remember about Larry, and of course he was probably my oldest friend, is that he was such enormous fun to be with. I mean, he loved being funny, and I'm sure he'd want to be remembered as a very funny man. He was great company.
The organ swells to Nimrod from the Enigma Variations by Sir Edward Elgar. Famous faces waiting for this service to start. Joan Collins there with the green scarf on, Jill Bennett on her right, Edward Fox sitting behind them. And in this service, there's going to be a very special procession of the objects that symbolize the life and work of Laurence Olivier. Carried to the high altar first by Douglas Fairbanks, Olivier's Order of Merit, his most treasured honor perhaps, the gift of the Queen. And then behind him, this special Oscar given for a lifetime's achievement in the film industry, which will be carried by Michael Caine. Paul Schofield with the silver model of the National Theatre, of which Olivier was director. And before that, of course, he was at the Festival Theatre at Chichester, and this silver model will be carried by Maggie Smith, one of his great friends. And then symbols of his career, this fascinating film script of Hamlet, when he directed himself in the film. Peter O'Toole will be carrying that. Then there's the wreath that was worn by Olivier as Coriolanus. It's going to be carried by Ian McKellen. And the two crowns, the left, King Lear's crown from the television series, carried by Dorothy Tutin, and Richard III's crown, carried by Derek Jacobi. And finally, at the rear of the procession, carried by Frank Finlay, this sword, which was first worn by Edmund Kean at the start of the 19th century to play Richard III. It was then presented to Henry Irving. It was finally given through the Terry family to Sir John Gielgud, and he gave it to Laurence Olivier to mark his performance as Richard III in 1944. lesson is going to be read from the nave pulpit by Albert Finney.
To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end.